Welcome everyone. I will just share here my screen. I would like to welcome all to the 7th edition of the Brazilian Geoscience Remote Sensing Young Professionals and ISPRS Summer Consortium Summer School, organized by the Geoscience Remote Sensing Society Brazilian chapter. This year, our event has webinar roundtables and also tutorials with hands-on. Please check our program that we are updating weekly. This year, this edition is organized by the Santa Catarina State University and UNO Chapecó. There are two Santa Catarina universities. Well, the event is supported by two international societies, as mentioned, the International Society of Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing and the Geoscience Remote Sensing Society. And then by two leading initiatives. One is the Young Professionals from IEEE, and the second one is the Student Consortiums led by ISPRS. Please check here the web page and see the advantages of being a member of the two scientific societies. We also invite you to check actually some welcome videos. Please do that, otherwise we will be fired. And we have a welcome message of our rectors and also presidents of the respective societies. Please, the videos are available in our main webpage. We also have support from FAPESC, that is our Santa Catarina Science Foundations, that actually support the event. Canoinhas Geoassessoria, that will make available some datasets for benchmarking, and the Instituto Gilson Volpato from Scientific Education. We also have the support from different universities and Brazilian institutes. And we started already on August 12 with the lectures given by Gilson Volpato in Portuguese about scientific writing, a roundtable about women in geosciences and remote sensing and experience from academic area and private and industry. And both were in Portuguese, but we also want to have those initiatives in English. Well, for today's lectures, I would like to invite Professor Mauricio Gallo from São Paulo State University to give actually the welcome message to this webinar and also introduce our colleagues that will be moderating and also give the welcome for our speaker today. Professor Gallo, thank you a lot actually for accepting this challenge, and I would like to pass actually to handle this room to you. Thank you again.
Thank you, Professor Veraldo. Good evening, Dr. Qihao Weng and Ms. Sherry Rose. Good morning, Professor Veraldo, Professor Marcato, the organizers, and all the audience. Together with me will be Professor Marcato, Associate Professor at the University of Mato Grosso do Sul, and Ms. Sherry Rose, that's President of International Society of Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing Student Consortium. Thank you very much. Marcato, do you want to say something? And Cheryl?
Hello, hello.
Hi everyone, welcome to this virtual summer school. The ISPRS is again very thankful to our partners in Brazil for making this possible, and I hope all the participants will learn a lot from this summer school. Thank you very much.
Okay, Cheryl. First of all, I will shortly introduce Dr. Qihao Weng. Uh, Dr. Weng is undergraduate in geography and received his PhD in geography from the University of Georgia in 1999. Dr. Weng's research focuses on remote sensing applications to urban environment and ecological systems and other related topics. Dr. Weng is author of more than 200 journal papers and 14 books related to remote sensing. Actually, Dr. Weng is a chair professor at the Department of Land Surveying and Geoinformatics at Hong Kong Polytechnic University. He worked he worked several years at Indiana State University, where he was also director of the Center for Urban and Environmental Change. And since 2015, he has been editor-in-chief of ISPRS Journal of Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing. Dr. Weng received many awards, as for example from ASPRS, NASA, American Association of Geographers, IEEE, and IEEE Geoscience and Remote Sensing Society. So after this short introduction, please feel free to start your presentation, Dr. Weng.
Okay, thank you, colleagues in Brazil and colleagues in Philippines, all the young professionals and students all over the world. My name is Qihao Weng. Currently, I'm a chair professor at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Today, I'm going to talk about remote sensing process and the dissemination of research results. My talk going to divide into 5 parts. First, I'm going to talk about scientific and technological method in remote sensing, which is followed by my introduction to ISPRS journal. Then I'm going to talk about the dissemination, preparation of manuscript and books, things like that. So that will be divided into 3 parts. Preparing to publish an article structure, article submission and peer review. Understanding the editor's decision is my final part of talk. I estimate my talk will be in an hour. First, let me briefly talk about scientific and technological method used in remote sensing. Let's review a little bit about the basic concept of remote sensing. Remote sensing is referred to the process of collecting data about objects or landscape features without coming into direct physical contact with them. We can perform remote sensing from the orbital platform, suborbital platform, and more today UAV, and some of those on ground. Remote sensing use or measure electromagnetic radiations reflected emitted from the terrains, and also can be divided into passive and active remote sensing, depending on the source of electromagnetic radiation. So remote sensing is a technique with long history and has been used in many different disciplines. Today, remote sensing not only a technology, but also is a science. For example, from the basic concept, we know as a human being, we see things use our eyes. We call this human perception. So look at the figures here to the left, human perception. So we use our eyes to see objects, including house and trees. So actually, our eyes are sensor. And the object, including trees and house, this is the objects to be sensed. Similarly, if we use a camera to the right here, and we can take the picture of trees and house, so the camera in this case becomes sensors. So between the sensors and the objects or landscapes we sensing, there is a connection between them right here. So these connections are electromagnetic radiation. So if we want to understand remote sensing in a more scientific way or more accurate, so we can see this example of satellite remote sensing, with the satellites fly over a certain area, scan Earth's surface, so producing a lot of those scanning lines, or we say pixels. And these pixels, each of those pixels record an energy. So this energy can be reflected energies, can be emitted energies. And depending on how much energy reflected, emitted, so we can differentiate different pixels. And these pixels and together form an image. When the image is downloaded into the computers, we can process these images to understand the landscapes and Earth's surface feature. So as a result of remote sensing is a digital image for today's remote sensing. So as we can see here, we see that these images here, digital image. However, if we zoom in these images, we see basically different shapes. Some of those shapes has very dark tone, some has very light tone, and some has in between this shape. So each of these tones actually associate with a digital number. And to this right, you see this digital number here. So each of these digital number is indicate how much energy a pixel receive from the Earth's surface and record it at the sensors, either at the satellite or in the airplanes or UAVs. So an important job of remote sensing or in the digital image processing is that we use a computer to process these numbers. We call process image. Actually, we process number because computer only know numbers. And by processing these numbers, we want to make sense of those images. So remote sensing process basically include 4 steps. The first step is identifying the problem. Second step, data collection. And then it's data analysis, and finally, information output. So here, that is the diagram I borrowed from Professor John Jensen's book. So in this book, indicate that remote sensing process here 4 steps: stating problem, collecting data, analyzing data, and information output. So I'm going to briefly go through this process, each of these stages. So first, in the staging problems, we can use different logic. For example, inductive logic, deductive logic, or technological logic. And we state hypothesis to test the hypothesis. And in collecting data stage, we collect, of course, remote sensing imageries, as we mentioned earlier. We use imageries from different platforms. But in remote sensing work, we also collect field data, sometimes laboratory data, and we also use ancillary data to help our understand remote sensing or landscape features better. For analyze the data, for a long time, we use something called analog image processing. So this also refer to the image interpretation. So we look at the images print out in the past, like those print in a photograph, and we try to see what is this. So human eye is powerful. So human eye can see a lot of things through the image by using different kind of interpretation elements, shape, colors, tone, associations, heights, all these kind of elements. We can use this to do the image understanding. After we enter the computer stages, and so we start to use computer to process images. Because at this time, a lot of satellite imagery or the remote sensing imagery is processed digitally. So become digital image. Like today, we use cell phones. So we take pictures. So this digital image, in order to understand this, we need to pre-processing these images. And then we may need to have image enhancement, okay, in order to know better. For example, spectral transformation or spatial transformations, contrast enhancements, things like that. After that, we use pattern recognitions. Image classification is a very basic and classical approach of pattern recognition. We use this for a long time. We still use it today. However, more and more today, the digital image go to more advanced of those computer processing. For example, we use a neural network. We use AI. We use computer visions. So all of those today's techniques, we want to use the computer, very powerful computers, to understand image better. So essentially, if we want to summarize the process of this whole the data analysis, basically is that today's image processing is try to combine human understanding, which is analog image processing. We use this for a long time. And at one time, we almost abandoned them. Say, okay, this is we all use a computer. So we start to have the digital image processing. After several decades of digital image processing, we realize that digital image processing has a lot of limitations. And now we need to combine both approach. And of course, analyzed data can also including scientific visualization, which is also important. Because when we see things, we see images at one time. This is, we may or may not get important information. However, human eyes tend to see the things that we see every day, in the daily life. So the scientific visualization or geo-visualization become an important process. Animation and time flybys, all these kind of tools have been used. So this is the third stage, analyzing data. The final step is information output. So we produce images, produce a map, produce statistics, and sometimes these data will be input into the GIS for further processing. So the scientific and technological method in remote sensing, basically we have three methods here. So the first method called inductive method, second deductive method, and the third one is a technological method. So we can also group these methods or this approach into either scientific approach or technological approach. Scientific approach include both inductive and deductive logic, while technological approach uses technological logic. So the inductive logic, as you can see here, studying observations, we may do image classifications, make generalization, what we see in the images, and come out a theory, come out understanding. We often call those insight. And the deductive approach start with a hypothesis. So where this hypothesis comes from? So basically, most likely, this hypothesis also come from the inductive approach. So inductive and deductive logic are linked together. And to test a hypothesis, we also need observations to either to verify or falsify our observation. So this is scientific approach. In the technological approach, we often start with a human need, and we create a certain kind of conceptual theorem, and then playing out the course of action and start application. So in the remote sensing approaches, in the remote sensing process, we use both scientific approach and the technological approach. We often say image interpretations actually observe the images, classify images, make generalizations. This is inductive logic. And so deductive logic, as we mentioned earlier, has a linkage to the inductive logic. So the only difference is that we need to first come up a hypothesis, and then we try to solve this, to testify or to verify or to falsify this logic. The technological logic, more and more, we use this as a remote sensing technological approach. So the focus here is to create a coherent plane. Once we have a coherent plane, then we can start to implement these planes. And this can be finished, can be complete without a formal hypothesis testing. So the coherent plane often is realized by creating a flowchart, for example, like in the computer science. So this is my first part of introduction to the scientific and technological approach in remote sensing. So the second part I'm going to talk about is research result dissemination. And many of these parts of discussions come from Professor Crenels, who is a former editor of international journal Remote Sensing. And I got a lot of these contents inspired by his discussion. So very well, discussion. So basically, why we need to publish our work? We can either completing a job, or to share new knowledge or discoveries, and to add to the whole body of knowledge. And we can also do publishing to prevent someone else from wasting their time to discover them again. So today, for example, we put a lot of those our data sets, our algorithms, models online become open source, so that other people can use. In the academic life, the publications is an essential part. So we say to publish or to perish. If you don't publish, you may get kicked out of your university. And of course, some people publish by earning money. And finally, and also important part, publications can help students, lecturers, teachers by writing a textbook. So we often say that a good researcher often can become a good teacher. So especially in the higher education. So the type of publication can be many. So as me, as an editor for a journal, so people always think, oh, that the publication, when we talk about publication, we always talk about the journal article. Actually, journal article only one of the publication type. Student can publish a thesis, either master or doctoral or internal report, conference proceedings. Now, conference proceedings doesn't mean it's not important. Some conference proceedings are very important. For example, like the computer vision conference proceedings, very premier publication type. With regular research paper in peer-reviewed journals, I'm going to talk about this a little more later. And we can also publish shorter papers, for example, like letters in referee journals. Some journal has these letters, some do not have. Or we can publish technical note, short communication in referee journals. And sometimes after you study a subject, a topic for a while, you review a lot of papers, you become an expert in that field, you may want to write a review articles. So to give a comprehensive perspective and or to examine the questions progress in a certain field, to predict the future developments in the field. So this is review article. And we can also write chapters in edit books. And of course, and for the middle career and later career, a lot of people, researchers, professors can write monograph. They become their own book, become a legacy. And so different type of this publication. It doesn't mean which one is better than the other. Journal articles and books have different readers, for example. And a very well-written textbook can have a larger readership and can last for generations. And several generations, for example, in the United States, a lot of those students, remote sensing students, read Professor John Jensen's textbook. And textbook can also make money, of course. And if it become very popular, suppose publisher may invite you to write, give you monies, you got loyalties. Edit books. So when you and also decided to have a group of people work together to create an edit book. And we see today we got a lot of those edit books. Some of those publishers, they only give you a template. Everything else is by the authors. Some of those books, that will be very difficult to sell, very hard to sell, more than a couple hundred copies. So in my opinion, if you want to have a good edit books, you must tell a good story with clear logic, and the book must be very well structured and written. And you can also consider invite famous authors, so that when people try to read book, they look at people's name. Monograph, as I mentioned, that is very specialized books. Often, only the very top professionals will read those books. So often have small readership, but that has a very good legacies. Okay, so for the mid and later career professionals, they may like to consider to write this. One thing I would remind the young professionals and students to remember, journal articles, although are required by many universities in order to graduate, normally journal articles have very small readership. So it will be very difficult if you go to international conference, for example, to find a big group of friends to read your book. Research paper is a standard form of publications. However, sometimes you may consider to publish a letter, technical note, or short communications would be more appropriate. Why? For example, you only conduct one study site, only have only tells one data set. So in that case, you may like to consider these letters, technical notes, or short communications, because the full research paper often require to have testing of multiple data set and multiple study sites. So another thing to remember that before you submit any papers to a journals, relevance is always the key factors. And so if you write a remote sensing paper, you submit to a remote sensing journal. If you write a GIS paper, submit to GIS journal. So if your papers is particularly in a specific area of application, although you use remote sensing or GIS as a tool, but you may like to consider to submit the papers to a specialized journal. So the choice of the journals is very important. Suppose someone has decided to write a paper for a journal, then someone must decide which particular journal to submit to. I will offer you a few considerations here to consider before you submit to a journals. The first thing, we need to consider the scope of the journals. So make sure you need to read the scope of the journal before submissions. And also the choice of the journal can affect the style and some of the detailed content of a paper. For example, ISPRS journal and the IEEE journal has very different style and formats. Some paper you may very well accept by IEEE journal, but cannot be accepted by ISPRS journal, and vice versa. It also impact the format of the paper. We know the IEEE paper has a special kind of format, and ISPRS journal doesn't require to have special kind of journal format. This doesn't mean a person got the paper rejected by IEEE journal should directly, without changing anything, submit to ISPRS journal. You know what I mean. So beware, some journal impose page charges and require something called article processing charge, called APC. And that can be very expensive. You need to look into this issue before you decide to submit to a journal, because APC can cost over 5,000 or 6,000 US dollars sometimes. It can be very expensive. Now, especially today, we see more and more open access called OA journals. They all require a certain amount of monies called article processing charge. So you need to ask your advisors, ask your institution if they can pay for it, if your paper got accepted eventually. So after you considering these factors, the next thing I will ask you to read the instruction for authors. This is important. You need to follow this step by step. So each of these will impact the fate of your papers. So the third part I'm going to talk about is to give you a brief review of publishing your work in the ISPRS Journal of Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing. I became an associate editor in year 2009, when we only have 4 editor and associate editors. And starting 2015 January, I became editor-in-chief of these journals. So my relationship with this journal has been quite long. So as you can see from these tables, when I just joined these journals, we only published here in year 2009. The whole year, we only published 66 papers. And last year, 2020, we published 254 papers. So you see that a lot of those papers, a lot more of those papers have been published today. This, of course, also indicate the progress in the remote sensing industry and the remote sensing become more and more useful. More and more university, more and more researchers join the force of remote sensing research. And you may concern that the acceptance rate of our journals. As we can see that from the very beginning, the acceptance rate of our journals is not already high at the beginnings. So since my joining of the journals is about 30% all the time, up and down. Until recent years, we have dropped down to a little bit below 20%. You may say, why? Is the standard became higher? This is not necessarily true. I tell you that in recent years, we receive much more submissions than previous years. So you can see that here, okay, in year 2009, for example, whole year, we only received 157 submissions, the paper, manuscripts. Last year, we received 1,534 manuscripts, about 10 times of those 2009. So we see a lot of those publications. Why? This had to do with our reputation, the quality of the journals. And later on, I'm going to discuss more about this. And before we go on to that point, first I want to let you to know that ISPRS journal is truly an international journal. Currently we have 2 editor-in-chief and 19 associate editors and more than 60 editorial board members. And these editorial teams come from all continents except for Antarctic. So we also have the submitted article by all continents. You hear Africa, Asia, Europe, North, Central America, Oceania, South America. You see that, so all over this. And if we look at the trend of top 10 countries and regions, China is number 1 in recent years, followed by India and United States, Brazil, Germany. Okay. So this is not always, the trend is not always like this. When I just joined the journal in year 2009, the whole China, although population account for 1/5 of the global populations, whole China only published 4 papers in a year, in whole years. So you can see that this is a progress. Of course, China invests a lot of money in the remote sensing industry. And the article accepted by regions, countries, so you see similar kind of trends here. And the good things I want to let you know that since I joined as editor-in-chief, okay, so the editorial speed for all submitted manuscripts become faster and faster. So you can see here, so this one, so the first colors here, this is yellow colors, submission, or orange colors, submission to first decision. Okay, this is reset. These numbers doesn't change too much because this is a death reset. But if you look at the submission to first decision standard, you see these numbers 11.5, 11.6 until this year's 9.7. Okay, so becomes shorter. So means that we average speed quicker. And the whole thing, submission to final editorial outcome, that from about 19 weeks and to now is 16 weeks. So this is thanks to the very dedicated work of editorial teams, associate editors. So we have been doing very well in these areas in terms of editorial speed. When I joined as associate editors, every year we receive the most prominent complaint is editorial speed, because sometimes it can be half years, can be 9 months, and now you see that 16 weeks, so 4 months from the beginning to the end. And the average speed for the published articles, so you can see that, so this also become quicker. Okay, if you look at this submission to final publications, these dark colors here, black colors, so you can see this is reduced. So everything is reduced. So as I said that this, we work very hard editorial team. Of course, editorial team has been expanding over the time. This is thanks to the support of ISPRS, International Society for Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing. And earlier we mentioned that why the submission, become, increase a lot. This had to do with our journal impact factors. So when I just joined the journals, you see impact factors 2.3. And this last year is 8.979. So very close to 9. And this journal is ranked number 1 in the category of physical geography, number 2 in remote sensing, so just below remote sensing or environment. In imaging science, number 3. In geoscience, number 5. So we're doing quite good, okay, in these areas. So I should mention that ISPRS journal, about 5-6 years ago, we started to adopt something called article-based publishing principle. That means that any accepted papers can be assigned bibliography information immediately after typesetting. It doesn't need to wait until all the articles in a issue, in a volume, got accepted. It doesn't need to be this way. And also, when preparing your papers, you can prepare in your own ways. So we don't have specific template for you to prepare. So we call this your paper, your way. However, as earlier I mentioned, if someone got the rejected paper from a specific journal without changing anything, directly submit to ISPRS journal, we can file it. We know you did not do any change. And finally, I want to mention the data repository. You not only can publish the paper, you can also publish the data, and to be hosted by the mandatory data repository. This doesn't require you pay any APCs or any more monies. And this data is also searchable in a mandatory data search. So this is a very good way of to publish your data and more results to share with the community if you wish to do so. The fourth part I want to talk is manuscript submission, review, and understanding of decisions. This part is very important, and as an editor-in-chief for so many years, as also an editor for a few years before that, so I got a lot of those, had to deal with all these issues day by day, almost my daily life. So I would say that before preparing your paper, you ask yourself the following questions. Do I have a new or interesting contribution? Am I aware of the current state of the art? Are my experiment methods sound? Are my results preliminary? For example, only use a single data set or single study areas, small study area. For example, my paper only uses 100 pixels, things like that. So if that is the case, you may like to submit to a conference papers. Okay, so submit to conference papers, you try to, to get some of those results and understand the process, and then later on you can submit full paper to a research journals, to a higher ranking journal, for example. And also, if your model complete, have I verified the findings? Because If you don't consider this question, your submission may be premature. This can lead to a death rejection. So for example, at ISPRS, we have a very high rate of death rejection. So after you consider these questions, you need to read and follow the author guidelines and instructions. This to ensure your paper has the essential elements. Now, this is important because I see some of those manuscripts, sent to ISPRS journal, they're missing one element or two. So you need to have abstract introduction that including backgrounds, the problem backgrounds, research problem identification, and your objectives. Then followed by methods. These often have methodology, experimental designs, results, discussions, and the conclusion. Acknowledgement's importance because a lot of journals require to have you acknowledge the funding source. Finally, more and more journals nowadays require you indicate the contribution of each author. This linking to the publication exit issue and the reference. Make sure that this is a reference is complete, the information is complete, is correct. I see a lot of those manuscripts submit to our journals. Everything else is good, but the reference is not complete, missing data or just messed up. So this indicate that someone may not do the good work, the rush to finish with something. Language is another important thing to consider. Now we have to face the reality is that English is the predominant language for scientific communication in the world still today. And so if the English is not your first language, you may need to put extra effort in this. And more this, nowadays there's an English editing company, so to allow you to submit your manuscripts, to them for the English polish. Some journal also do that. I would have to say, this English polishing company editing service, some of those are quite good. So if you not very sure your English, writings, or you feel that you need to have some help in these areas, make sure to check this. Open internet, Google, you should be able to find a lot of those. Before submission, you need to proofreading. So I write proofread 3 times to emphasize proofreading is important. Be sure that you should be your own harsh critique. And also, in my own opinion, in my own experience, after I finish papers and manuscript, I often put down theirs for a few weeks. And another thing I like to do is that I print out manuscript that become hard copies. Today, although we do a lot of soft copy, but you need to hard copy, print out, and then read this. Put there for a while, and then read this. Make sure that your manuscript is watertight as possible, as perfect as possible. Okay. So in terms of scientific content, formattings, and languages, because if you don't do this work, you may get rejected right away. That's something journal often have the editor also has often have something called death reject. So the journal personnel is the issue I want to discuss next. Often we have editor-in-chief called EIC. The job of EIC is to assign paper to associate editors for handling review recommendations from associate editor we call AE. Sometimes they call associate editor. Sometimes they call editor. The title may differ. Associate editor try to find reviewers, and after your paper is accepted, the paper will pass over to production editor. So that person is responsible for scheduling the publication of the papers. You often got the proof, the paper manuscript proof from those editors. Copy editor, sometimes it's important. And for some journals, they do typesetting articles, and they sometimes can also help to improve some language and formatting and English languages. Now, these copy editors also very important job, okay, for the books, publish a book, for example. If your English is not your first language, so the publisher may ask a copy editor, may assign a copy editor to do the work, to help you improve. Article submissions. So every journal, organization, and paper handling procedure are slightly different, but follow almost similar, reasonably genetic descriptions. There can be a pre-screening process performed by publishing company staff. For example, some of those open access journals nowadays, they do this. They check formatting, language qualities, or use a proper template, something like that. But in many other journals, they don't have this, this pre-screening. Instead, they have editor-in-chief EIC perform something called initial screening. Because a journal often receive many submissions, for example, like ISPRS, we receive a lot. So many papers don't get passed to EIC, immediately got death reject. I'm going to talk about why later on. What are the reasons for death rejection? So EIC can reject a paper immediately if a paper is not relevant to the journal's scope and aim. Now remember, this is the viewpoint of editor-in-chief. If a manuscript is fall within the journal's scope and aim, it's not author's viewpoint. So some author may write email, say why, Dr. Weng, can you explain why my paper is not within the journal's scope? Sometimes I can help, can explain, sometimes I cannot, because I receive too many manuscripts. I cannot explain everything. But so make sure you need to read this journal scope and aim before your submissions. A paper can also be death reject because the paper doesn't describe a substantially new contribution. This is also important. This we call novelty of the paper. And or having excess amount of verbatim texture overlapping with existing publications. So many journals has a certain kind of threshold percentages. Let's say your manuscript has texture overlapping with existing publication over 15%. This immediately alert the editor, say, okay, what the nature of the overlappings? So where is the overlapping occur in the manuscript? Things like this. And of course, difficult to comprehend. I had to add here, the formatting also important. And sometimes I reject a manuscript because the reference is not complete, just missing everywhere. So things like this make editor-in-chief feel that this manuscript is not ready to send out for peer review. So if an article is suitable, then it will be assigned to a handling editor. So sometimes we saw associate editor, or maybe assigned to the editor-in-chief itself to manage the review and to make the recommendation based on the reviews. Some journal has a local managing editors that can help manage the review and associate editor to make a recommendation, but many journals do not have. So approval of the final decision for an article rests with the EICs. So handling editor only make recommendations. So handling editor may say, okay, this manuscript should be minor revisions. So editor in chief author review the recommendations, and also the reviewers' comments may say, oh, this should be a major revision. So things like this, so can be a little different. So decision about papers is made by the EIC on the basis of scientific merit, not by the publisher. So what handling editor or associate editor do? So they look at a few things. They look at if the paper fall within the scope of the journal, number things. So they also do prescript scientific innovation. So is this new? Is this the immediately obvious for death rejections? We should remember that the stronger journals require a more substantially new significant contribution. And the handling editor may also look at other authors simply implement a previously published algorithm, testing it with a new data set. Okay, so these are the questions. And then the structures. Is the abstract, very well written? One thing I should tell the young authors, the abstract is the very important part of the manuscript. So you should pay a lot of attention to write your abstract and to highlight your new and innovative aspect of a paper. So after the paper sent out for reviews, editor, associate editor or handling editors, they will start to look at this, if what kind of recommendation they will make. So you may say, so editor, any editor, associate editor, handling editor, or editor-in-chief, they all are the peoples. So when we do things, are they subjective or objectives? So basically, a good editors, in my opinion, should uphold the journal's reputations, should try to be as objective as possible. And we also, of course, also consider not to waste reviewers' time with poor quality paper. And so professional and personal pride are the important consideration for being an editor. So during the peer review process, the experts asked to critically assess and comment on a paper submitted to the journals. Editor rely on reviewers' opinion to guide their decisions. So this is important, we call this indiscernible quality control process in scientific publications. The peer review had to be fair and unbiased, timely and confidential. So if you got invited to review someone's papers, even your friends, do not tell your friend what do you write down for this manuscript. And so if you invited by handling editor to review a papers, they may be selected from your suggested list of reviewers or from the database of reviewers. For example, our journal have thousands of reviewers in our database. And all the list of the reference in your papers, or editor's own network of peers. So the reviewers basically ask for a few questions. If this manuscript fit the journal's scope, are there any new contributions, impact to the discipline, technical accuracy? If this manuscript well organized, well written, will present. What is important for the scientific papers? So figures, tables, that where your results must be present very well. So this is an important part of your manuscript. So the interesting thing about these reviews, okay, often we have some authors, they complain about some reviewers, say, oh, so this review is not fair, or this review, the reviewer doesn't know my paper at all, things like that. We had to face the fact that, this reviewer, any review provide comments or suggestions is not final. Because the associate editor, handling editor, and editor-in-chief will read these comments, will find if these comments are too harsh, too critical, or condemning. Or sometimes some reviewer write very little, but recommend this should be accepted. Or sometimes they just write a couple of sentences, say this manuscript should be rejected. In all these cases are very disappointing. So we need to find more reviewers, okay, to provide better reviews. So this is the more interesting thing is that review, sometimes the different review can have different opinions. And so some people say, oh, this paper is good, very good, should be published right away. Some other reviewers say this paper should be rejected right away. So in this case, so the editor need to read this, or may need to find more reviewers and try to see why the different reviewers come out at different review, different comments. So reviewers are often asked to answer a few questions. I list here for you to read. But this essentially, the questions will be very similar to the questions we present to the associate editors. For example, we ask if the paper is of interest to the journal reader, if the manuscript fit into the scope, and if this is technically correct, very well written, organized, conclusion, if this justified by the experimental observations and reference adequate, things like this. And so we use these comments to make recommendations, handling editors. But just remember that all these reviews, all these reviewers provide opinions there. It's also to help. Most time, they provide very constructive comments to help author to improve the papers. We often ask reviewer to turn around 2 to 3 weeks, sometimes a month. For our journal, ISPR Center, we ask reviewers to turn around 4 weeks, and sometimes 3 weeks if this is for a revised manuscript. Finally, I want to talk about this understanding editor's decision. So editor's decision can be, accept, minor revision, major revision, reject, and resubmission. And so in many cases, these are accept right away. This is a very rare situation, minor, very rare situations. A lot of papers have to go through major revision and then minor revision. So typically, we have 2 rounds of revision. So we need to interpret what constitute minor and major revisions very carefully. And we need to understand reviewers' comments to see what are the issues, what are the important issues reviewers provide, what are the important comments they provide. I had to talk about reject decision now. So good journal typically very high rejection rate, as we mentioned earlier. It often bad paper get rejected, but sometimes bad paper get accepted. So this is the no justice in the life. So sometimes paper get rejected from high quality journal, get accepted by low quality journals. The editor also can make wrong decisions. Some good scientific work can get rejected. Okay, so this is something that we need to consider. Sometimes a manuscript got rejected because the contribution is not sufficiently articulate or convincing. So this is the issues. Sometimes language is not so good. Okay, and sometimes the journals just receive high volume of submissions. They had to ask for very high, had to have a very high rejection rate, so requires harsh reviews. So these can all happens. And editors sometimes, if receive conflicting, we call split reviews. So editor may sometimes err on the side of caution to ensure that journal integrity is maintained. So can just reject. So potentially good paper can get rejected, okay, in some case. But anyway, in my over 10 years of experience as an associate editor and editor-in-chief, I always try to spend a lot of time read the manuscript, to try to do the good work. So this is the editor, okay? So we always need to carefully about this. For the authors, I would say that I have some advice. For example, if someone got initial the manuscript got rejected, he or she should restrain. Although sometimes you can get angry, you may say, okay, this reviewer, doesn't know my paper, my manuscript, but you must control. Remember that do not write an angry diatribe to the editors. This can make enemies. And so you just remember, if this paper got rejected, you may want to take this advice to revise this, to submit to different journal, or if you can substantially revise the manuscript to the same journal. So for the revision, so this often has the limited time for each author to revise. So if you can take the reviews, point by point, seriously, that often will lead to the publications. And so if you see a difficult comment, you may not be able to respond, or you feel very challenging to respond. You just need to explain. If you don't want to respond to a difficult comment or suggestion, you need to provide a strong justification to tell why you don't want to respond or why you cannot respond to this. In your response, remember, do not be rude in your replies, because if reviewer see this, they will be very disappointed. So just remember that you cannot win a war of wars with an anonymous person, because this person may be highly respected by the editors. So in resubmissions, if it's a major revision, editor normally will send out to the original reviewers. If a minor revision, editor may choose send out or not to send out. So some minor revision manuscript can get accepted right away. However, if an author doesn't spend a lot of time to revise the manuscript, even after the major revision, the first round can get rejected at the end. So after your paper got accepted, you should, of course, you should, congratulate to yourself. But also remember that the proof or typeset article is important. You need to provide a timely response to these proof readings. And this often is your last chance to make any changes to your manuscript, to your paper before publications. Now, remember that after your publications, if you want to change your papers, often become much more difficult. Finally, I want to take a couple minutes, 1 minute here, to tell about the opportunities at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Currently, I'm searching for several positions to work with me here at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, including research assistants that is offered to the PhD students to study at our university, funding also 3 to 4 years, and postdocs for 2 years funding. And if you have more advanced level, for example, you already done the important publications, important research experience, or you already done some postdoc experience, you can apply for research assistant professor positions that offer 3-year funding with the possibility of extending. All these positions focus on remote sensing, imaging science, geospatial AI, geospatial computer vision, geospatial big data, with application in urbanization, sustainability, coastal environment and ecosystem, and global change. Remember, Hong Kong Polytechnic University is a very famous university. In 2021, this university ranked 25th in Asia, 66th internationally by QS. I'm working in the Department of Land Surveying and Geoinformatics, called LSGI. This is a widely recognized as a center of excellence in both education and research in geometric and in related fields in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Weng, for presentation, your lecture. In fact, you touched on many points relevant to our community, for the researchers, for graduate students, for editors, for reviewers. Thank you very much. I have one question, and before Mercator and Sherry, that probably they have some questions. An alternative that has been considered for publication by many researchers are preprints, and this kind of publication has been growing. What is your opinion about publishing preprints? For example, in the Cornell University repository that is very famous.
Is it possible to send your questions over the private chat as we decided last time?
Excuse me?
Can you send your questions? Can you collect your questions, or and send over as a private chat, as the last time we communicate?
I will try to write here.
Okay, great. I see the question now.
Yeah.
Okay. Preprints become a trend in today's scientific publishing. And actually, a lot of those websites allow to host all the preprints. So ISPR as a journal allow the authors to send the preprint to a certain kind of database to be hosted. So we are totally fine with this action.
Oh yeah. Okay. Thank you. Cherry Mercator, you have some questions?
Yes, I have some questions here. However, Cheryl, ladies first, as you prefer, or not.
Yeah, I have a question. Maybe it's more of a request for an advice. Do you have any advice for young researchers when they attempt to publish in a high impact factor journal?
I would say that if young authors or students, graduate students, try to publish in a high-ranking journals, it's often difficult at the beginnings. I would say the first thing, ask these young authors to talk to their advisors, and so normally their advisor will be more experienced in publishing industry. And I also see a lot of those cases where the young authors try to publish in the lower rank journal at the beginning of the publishing career. And later on, they, after publishing one or two, they gain experience. And actually, of course, as I talk going on, you see that the publications, the whole preparation, submissions, reviews, decision, this takes some time to learn. So I would say that the young authors can consider this as the first step, to try to aim at the a little bit lower level instead of the first manuscript to the top journals. So this can often get rejected. So after they got some good news, they get encouraged by this, then you can do a little more. And also this is the nature of the scientific discovery. At the beginning, you may see that when we just start touching a certain topic, so we know a little bit. We test one data set, we study at one side. It will be very difficult at the beginning. Say I prepare 3 years, I study 20 sites all over the world, things like this. So it will be much more difficult. So I would say that at the beginning, try to aim a little bit lower, and after gain experience, and then go to the higher.
Thank you very much. I think in recently I just had this interesting experience because because there are so many journals that are appearing lately or that are merging. And I think we tried several times for a low impact factor journal, and then we ended up trying to a higher impact factor journal, and then that's the time that we actually got a review. So I think it's really interesting to see how it works. Thank you very much for your answer, and that's really good advice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Weng, for your presentation. It was very relevant. You clarified many points about the publishing process. Thank you very much. It's important to mention that we have public from around the world. We have people from Iraq, Nigeria, Pakistan, China. So thank you very much. So one point that I would like to discuss with you, it is about one review paper that you published in 2007 that has more than 3,000 citations considering Google Scholar. That time you pointed out neural networks as a future trend, which is very interesting for us these days. How do you see the current status and future of classification techniques? This is my first question. And the second is related to the review papers. The number of review papers is increasing, as we can see based on a search in Web of Science, for example.
Mhm.
How to succeed in this type of article, because not all of them has good number of stations. And I would like to ask you about this.
Okay. Thank you for the question. The first part of the question you asked, our 2007 article on imaging, image classification and review of image classification. That is the article I work with Dr. Denson Lu, who graduated in my department at Indiana State University in year 2000. So when we work together, we discuss about this imagery classification and change detection is both his main work and my main work, main research work at that time. So as we know that in earlier remote sensing, especially satellite remote sensing, focus on a lot of things on image classifications, layers, lane cover classification, and change detection. So we both like these topics, so review this, discuss it many times. So basically, we want to spend a lot of time try to update the knowledge in these fields. As earlier I mentioned that Professor John Jensen's book was very popular in United States and in many other parts of the world. And there is a chapter there, a couple of chapters focus on image classification and other chapter on digital change detection. Both Dr. Lu and I feel that this should be an update on those topics, because Dr. John Jensen's book was written many years ago. So we feel that we can spend some time, we want to work on these areas. So that is why we publish these articles. And so the neural network at that time already a trend. Okay, this neural network is not new concept, it's not new technique. It's as a matter of that today's more neural networks more advanced because with more computing powers. And we see a lot of those, computer visions, AI's techniques. We already use this, but it's not the new technique. It's suddenly that we have more computing power, we have more interest. It's like an old points. This become a new point. So that's why we have this one there. And second question related to this one, you said that how can we write a review article to have over 3,000 citations? We, both Dr. Lu and I, we did not plan on this. We have to say that at the beginning, we just feel that this need to update these topics. And we don't know that this article can become as such popular later on. But we do spend a lot of time. We work on every stage, every aspect of the image classifications. So as I earlier mentioned that in order to write a review article, I would have to say that you need to read a lot of those articles. And I would encourage you, the young authors, do not write a review article when they are as graduate students. Do not try to do this, because that wastes too much time. Because normally the young authors, when they just touch a new topic, they will be very difficult to comment, to prospect or retrospect on the developments. So this will be something that's very difficult for young authors to do it. So I would say that at the beginning, young authors should focus on more of those, the real research. And after a few years, you see, I already accumulate a lot of knowledge in these areas. If you feel that you have very good, command of the English, the writings, scientific publishing, then you can consider this. And I ask all this the audience here, if you interested to write a review paper for ISPRS journals, please send your abstract, send your initial thinking to me, send an email to me, because I can tell you what kind of things I look at in a review articles. That is actually just like the publication today. I talk about research paper mostly. Review article also has a certain kind of guidelines, a certain kind of format. So what kind of things an editor look into this? This is not only me. There's many other very senior editor. They look at similar kind of information. So write me an email if you really think that you want to write a review paper or you're about to write a review paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for great explanation. We have questions from the audience. I don't know, Professor Mauricio, Cheryl, could you please share?
Yes, we have one question from Jeshan Afzal. Is novelty most important to publish in journal with high impact factor? This is the first question. And or another factor is the most important when considering the top journals?
I would have to say that in my viewpoint that novelty is an important factor if you want to publish a journal with a high impact factor. Now, I do not, however, equal the good journals with a high impact score. So some journal has a very high journal impact score. Doesn't mean these journals are good journals. So, okay, some of those authors there, you know what I mean. Some journal has a very high, they can create a very high impact score in a few years. But you read the papers, you will see that the paper published in the journals, they're not so good. Why? Because of impact factor calculations and the journal articles quality is a different stories. But overall, that I think that, as earlier I answered Cheryl, is that if you want to publish, if any author want to publish in the high-ranking journals, you will face the much higher rejection rate by the journal, simply because many more people want to publish in a high-rank journal. Some countries, some university, if you publish in a Nature or in Science journals, you got the monetary reward. You got a lot of money, or you immediately promote to professors, things like this. So this is very attractive for people to publish in a high impact journal or high rank journals. This also explains why the ISPRS journal will receive a lot of manuscript nowadays. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. One question. You don't believe that the article publishing charge from some publishers is a strong limiting factor?
Well, article processing charge, this has become more and more common nowadays because open access journal. Now, we also face the challenge is because some people say, I want to publish, I can give you money, I want to publish it in your journal. So this has been the open access journals, open access publication has become a trend in some countries, for example, some European countries. In other countries, they may not be. So ISPRS journal has been debating these issues. So we feel that if we adopt this open access, charge APCs for every article, some very good manuscript, some very good article may not want to publish it with us. So there is something that we feel that the money, while the open access fee, article processing fee is a factor for the publisher, but the scientific content is also important. After many long discussions at ISPRS, so earlier this year, ISPRS decided to publish a new journal called ISPRS Open Journal of Photogrammetric Remote Sensing. So in that new journals, every article is open access, and every article need to pay for it.
Okay. Marcato, you have one question?
So I have many questions here. So one point, Professor, is regarding the, as you mentioned, the journals articles are for more restricted readers. So you are very active on LinkedIn, for example. Do you believe that social media is a powerful tool for us researchers?
I would have to say that I don't play social media a lot. Okay, recently you see I kind of play a little more. I'm much less active than Shell, for example, in social media. So because recently we recruit graduate students, postdocs, and research assistant professor to work in my team. So I started to post more, okay, in these areas. Normally, I don't spend a lot of time because a lot of time I'll be too busy for my own work and for the journals. But I see this is, of course, the young people, they like to use social media. So I will not object. I would say that this maybe is another good way of communication. But anyway, for any young authors, or if you want to publish with ISPRS journal, or if you have interest in working at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, okay, you can drop me a messages in LinkedIn or Facebooks, like this. But I consider emails as official means of communications. I like to receive emails.
Cheryl, please.
I think we have another question from our participants. So they mentioned that it's a very nice talk. Can you please share your thoughts about the important task of reviewers for a given journal?
I would say that this is the reviewers is essential. It's a core part of those peer review process. Without reviewers, we cannot do anything. I mean, the reviewers, associate editor, handling editor, sometimes also act as reviewers. So we provide the comments on every aspect, scientific aspects, presentations, structures, languages, and all of this. And if this the journal scopes something like this, we rely on reviewers to provide those important comments and contributions. So after a while, we select the reviewers, active researcher, and reliable reviewers to become our board member. So we do it every 3 years. So if you interested in working in this, and I would say that you should start to think about this. And I also consider the graduate students, especially when you at the later stage of graduate studies, you should consider to review the manuscript for some journals. If someone out here in the audience want to review for ISPRS journals, send me an email. Okay, I welcome your contributions, and I value this very highly. I think this is very important for build up your academic reputations, and to learn the peer review process. And later on, when you start to write your manuscript, when you submit your manuscript, you know, now the other people act as reviewers and why they provide this kind of review. So it will help you to understand better about the scientific review process. Thank you.
Professor Weng, we have one question from the audience. Most of journals not reply after manuscript acceptance. They take long time to review the article. Most of people disheartened. What would you suggest that the researchers in this regards?
I would say that I cannot say for all the journals, but if you submit a manuscript to our journals, if you wait 1.5 months, 6 weeks, you do not receive anything, you welcome to write an email to the handling editor, CC me, CC editor-in-chief, or you can directly write to me saying that, okay, which manuscript I submit. I will make sure that the review process goes smoothly. Now, we should remember that a lot of remote sensing researchers, they are very busy. Remote sensing is a science and technology. So using these technologies, some people make money. Some people are very busy. So sometimes it will be very difficult to find reviewers for a certain manuscript. But especially if your research is focusing on a very tiny area. It doesn't mean so your research is meaningless or has less meaningful. It's just because your research area is too narrow and sometimes it will be difficult to find. But anyway, I encourage you, the authors, to write email to the editor-in-chief. Use the manuscript reference number and write very politely to ask, just check into this. Do not wait until, let's say, 3 months later, 4 months later, half years later, say, what happened to my manuscripts? That I'm editor-in-chief, but I'm also author. I don't want to see my manuscript, hanging there with a reviewers for half years or years without doing anything, right? So I think that you should, because editors or associate editor, they sometimes can be overwhelmed by a certain task, so can be too busy. So give them a reminder. That is the good way of communication. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Geraldo, do we have time for the last question or not?
Yes, is this possible? And then we can conclude with the final remarks from Marcato and Chero as well.
Yeah, please, Marcato.
Yes, the last question, Professor Weng, is regarding the reproducibility, which is essential in science. So public data sets and also codes are essential for the assessment of novel methods, for example. How do you see this in remote sensing community, as it is not mandatory, for example, to turn the dataset available? I had other experience in other journals from hydrology, for example, that I need to publish the dataset previous to the review process. So the editor-in-chief said we cannot proceed to the review process only after you publish your dataset. How do you see this in our community?
I would say that this issue in recent years become a preeminent important issue. If I see, for example, as editor-in-chief, if I see an author use little data, small set of data, I see an issue potentially with the issue of reproductivities, I will reject this paper right away. So this is in my opinion, that especially today, we use a lot of AIs, computer visions, things like this. So people also use the artificial data set. So these become key issues. So we reject a lot of those papers. The methodologically is sound. Technically it's complicated. And execution is also good. But we feel that the reproductivity may be an issue. So I see this become more and more important. So that is why I also encourage you, the authors, do it possible, if possible, to publish your data. Okay, each of those published data set, you also receive a DOIs. You don't need to pay monies, but you receive a DOIs. So potentially can increase your impact, your citation, or your publication. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Weng, for your answer and also for being here with us during your night. So thank you again. 2 hours, near 2 hours here with us, but we have I have other questions and also the audience, but we need to finish this talk. And as you mentioned, everyone can send an email to Professor Weng. And again, thank you very much for being here with us, clarifying many points that it's very important for our community and also for the Brazilian researchers. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. I like as I shared the other day. I said I've been to Brazil about 10 years ago now, and I always like to go back to Brazil again. And I like to be with young authors, graduate students. I like it. People has any questions, please send me an email. Okay, drop me a line in the LinkedIn's, in the Facebooks. Okay, so that I may be able to to answer your question.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Harry, please.
Yeah, so I think many of our participants today also learned a lot from you, Dr. Weng, especially from your experiences as an editor of a well-known journal. And I think there are many useful takeaways both from the lecture and the Q&A session that we can all think about when we write and publish. So thank you very much for this great lecture today.
Thank you, sir.
Professor Weng, on behalf of Brazilian chapter of IEEE Geoscience Remote Sensing Society, thank you for your talk. It was very interesting and important for the audience. And if you allow, we can send some additional questions from the audience to you, if you allow. So thank you. I think that as Mercato told, we have a lot of points to discuss, but due to the time, especially for you, that in the evening, but the presentation was very nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Any more questions? Okay.
The song.
Okay, just a final message, just to say thank you actually for these brilliant lectures and for those very important advice actually for the young generations. They need actually such advice because they are doing their undergrad, their graduation, and they have to publish actually. And those aspects are very, very important, even if they have to go for low impact factor first, and then with the time to achieve, let's say, high ranking papers. With that, I think we close actually this webinar. Again, thank you actually so much for spending and giving actually the pleasure of your precious time to be with us. And we really hope that we can, after the pandemic situation, invite you to come here in Brazil personally and then deliver speech and talks in our conferences. Professor Gallo, Professor Marcato, and Cheryl, thank you also so much actually for accepting this challenge and also for your time for moderating here Professor Weng's speech. Thank you a lot for all. Thank you also for the audience. And we close now here this sessions, and I wish all a pleasant week. Thank you a lot.
Goodbye for now.
Bye.
Okay.
All right.